So, a massive government tech policy, one that's been in the works for years, just completely hit a brick wall. We were looking at a future where a mandatory digital ID was required for every single worker in the UK. But now, that plan has been totally scrapped. We're going to unpack exactly what happened, why it was so incredibly controversial, and what this huge U-turn means for the future of your identity.
And yeah, let's just cut right to the chase. The big headline here is that the UK government has done a complete 180 on its plan to force every worker to use a specific government-run digital ID. It is a massive shift, and it all happened because of an absolutely huge public and political backlash. Okay, so let's really dive into what this major policy reversal actually looks like. Because this wasn't just some minor tweak or a small adjustment. No, this was a fundamental top-to-bottom change in the government's entire direction on this. Now, to be crystal clear, digital right-to-work checks, those are still going to be mandatory for employers. But the really crucial change is that you, the worker, will not be forced to sign up for the government-specific digital ID system. Instead, you'll still be able to use other things, like your physical passport, to prove you can legally work. So what was this original plan that caused such a massive stir in the first place? I think to really get why this U-turn is so significant, we have to rewind and look at what the government was so determined to do just a short while ago. And, the government's original stance was incredibly firm. There was zero ambiguity about it. A government minister laid it out in the starkest possible terms, just as you see here. This was never a suggestion. It was going to be a hard and fast requirement for anyone who wanted a job. And the main justification for all of this? Well, it was very heavily focused on immigration control. The government argued that a mandatory digital ID would make it much easier to clamp down on people working illegally, and they said it would also simplify the whole process for employers. The end goal was one single compulsory system for everybody. But that key word, compulsory, is what triggered a massive backlash from all sides. And what's really fascinating here is the sheer scale of the opposition that forced this U-turn. It wasn't just one group. It came from the public and from right across the political aisles. This wasn't just a handful of activists. A parliamentary petition opposing these digital IDs got nearly 3 million signatures. I mean, that is a truly staggering number, and it just goes to show how deeply this policy really worried the general public. The political opposition was just as fierce. And get this, it even came from inside the governing Conservative Party itself. Senior Minister Kemi Badenoch really didn't mince her words, just straight up calling it a terrible policy and saying she was glad to see it go. The Liberal Democrats, well, they jumped all over this, framing it as just another example of policy reversals. Their spokesperson, Lisa Smart, came out with this pretty memorable line, painting a picture of a government that's just constantly changing its mind on really big issues. And this quote just brilliantly illustrates the view from Reform UK. Their leader, Nigel Farage, framed the whole thing not as just a simple policy change, but as this fundamental victory for personal freedom against what he called government overreach. So, with all that said, where does that leave the government's plan now? The mandatory part is gone, so what's actually left of this whole digital ID project? This little chart here really gets to the heart of the U-turn. So, first, the requirement, it's shifted from mandatory to voluntary. This is the biggest change, right? The compulsion is gone. Second, look at the main purpose. It's been completely reframed. What was sold as an immigration tool is now being presented as a convenience for accessing public services. And finally, user choice. It's back on the table. You won't be forced into one digital system. You can still use things like your passport. Now, the technology behind this is actually something a lot of you might already be using, maybe without even realizing it. It's called gov.uk One Login. It's a single-account system that already has over 12 million users for things like applying for a veteran's card or managing power of attorney. This existing system is the foundation of the new voluntary ID plan. So, the idea is basically a two-part system. First, you verify your identity using the gov.uk One Login that's already out there. Then, down the line, a new app called the gov.uk Wallet will let you store that verified digital ID securely right there on your phone for easy access. Okay, so here's the crucial point. Even with this new voluntary plan, the controversy is definitely not over. The whole focus has just shifted from if this should happen to how it's happening, and more specifically, how secure the technology actually is. And that right there brings us to the big, looming, unanswered question that's now dominating this whole debate. The mandatory part is gone, sure, but millions of people are still using the gov.uk one login system, so is it actually safe? Well, Conservative MP and longtime civil liberties campaigner David Davis has raised some incredibly serious alarms about this in Parliament. He alleges that parts of the system were developed by contractors in Romania on unsecured computers, that the system's official security certification had actually expired, and that this creates a massive risk of the entire population's data being exposed to hackers or even foreign states.
And to really drive home just how severe he believes these security risks are, David Davis made this really chilling comparison. He warned that a major data breach could be even worse than the Horizon post office scandal, that awful IT failure that wrongly led to hundreds of innocent people being prosecuted. That is a very powerful and very timely warning.
So, it seems like while the battle over a mandatory ID is over, the debate has just shifted to a new front. On one hand, the government is pushing this vision of digital convenience. But on the other, you've got these serious security questions still swirling around the very core of the system. It all leaves us with this fundamental question. In this high-stakes balancing act between convenience and security, is the UK's digital ID project really ready for prime time?